The human body is full of trillions of bacteria, viruses, and fungi. They are collectively known as the microbiome. These microbes live on and inside the body. We typically think of bacteria and other organisms as pathogens, the source of disease and nothing but trouble. But in fact, many bacteria and other organisms are a necessary part of our body's ecosystem, and in fact, necessary for life. What we have learned over the last few decades is that, in fact, a healthy microbiome affects not only your gut health, but your immune system, heart health, weight control, and even our brain, emotions, behaviors, and hormones. The need to better understand these microorganisms and their impact on our health is what we are here to talk about today. Welcome. This is GynoCurious. I'm your host and co-creator, Dr. Amy Novatt. From both sides of the speculum, we are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. Please send any comments to comments@radiofreerhinecliffe.org or to gynocurious@gmail.com. Please, while listening right now, take out your phone and give the show 5 stars and leave a comment. Consider sharing with others. This helps promote the show and perpetuates my doing GynoCurious. So today I am speaking with Meg Richichi, a certified acupuncturist practicing in Atlanta, Georgia. Meg helps women learn about the effects of their microbiome on their endocrine system and ways to better improve their health. Welcome, Meg. Thanks for joining me.
I'm so delighted to be here.
And it's funny. I'm looking at you, and I mentioned this when we last saw each other. You're wearing a turtleneck, and as a Northeasterner, a New Yorker, I always think, oh, Atlanta is so warm, but it's not.
It's in the 20s. The other week it
Wow.
was freezing, and we don't have the same insulation as you up north. And
Yeah.
I've actually experienced being really cold down here and in Charleston because the houses are not as insulated as up where you live.
Yeah, so it's an interesting twist on the climate shifts we're seeing. Yeah, you're getting colder,
had a
we're getting warmer.
super hot, humid summer. Fabulous for your skin, keeps it very dewy. And suddenly the temperature has really plummeted. So
Yeah, well, keep warm.
My blood's thinner than it used to be when I was up in New York City.
Yeah. Oh, the phenomenons of aging. It's very interesting to see how it manifests. So thank you for joining us. And what I'd like to do today is kind of speak in greater depth around, the microbiome and hormones. And I know this is one of your areas of interest. So I guess let's just talk about, how do humans develop a microbiome? How does it come about? Can you talk about that?
I mean, the microbiome is, how does it come about? I mean, we inherit our mother's microbiome. And I mean, it's generational. Each generation inherits the mother's microbiome to pass along to the next generation. And so if your mom has a really good microbiome, that is the makeup of the bacteria in the gut, then if she passes that along to you, then your immunity is going to be stronger. You're going to have, I usually see a lot of times when I see a lot of respiratory, and I hope I'm going in the right direction because I'm going to bounce back and forth. But when I start seeing a lot of sinus, or I should say allergies, and I see asthma and skin conditions, I always ask about the mom's health. And there's that beautiful vaginal christening that babies experience once they go through the vaginal canal. They get the mucus in every orifice. They get a little fecal matter. Fecal matter is good because it's a fecal transplant. You're initiating that orally, your mother's microbiome, and you're taking that on. But the issue today is, and I say this all the time, I'm going to jump a little because I'll tie it in. If our gut is wonky, our hormones are wonky. So people go, well, what do you mean by that? Well, 80% of your immune system is in the lining of your GI tract. And if that is compromised, then that's going to be impacting every aspect of your health. So what we want to, it starts off with our mothers during utero. But then what influences that during life are what is our diet? What are we eating? How are we creating diversity in our diet? Are we eating fermented foods? Do we take probiotics? Have we been exposed to many antibiotics over the years? I mean, I always talk about that. Have you been under a lot of stress? Stress is one, I mean, it can change the microbiome within like a day.
Yeah.
So there are a variety of factors, but your gut influences every aspect of who you are. So when I'm dealing a lot with individuals that come to me with autoimmune issues, from Hashimoto's to Crohn's, I have somebody coming in with lupus, I always want to look at the gut. I look at environmental factors. I look at a variety of things. Can I share how I started looking more into women's hormones in the gut?
Yes, but I want to back us up because what
Sure.
I really want to point out to our listeners is that we have this concept that so many places in our body are so-called sterile. But in fact, that's not true. And what I wanted to point out was our microbiome, as Meg's pointing out, comes from the placenta, comes
Yeah.
from the vaginal canal, comes from our mother's stool, again, comes from the foods grown in soils and the way those foods
Yeah.
are processed. So basically, our microbiome starts at conception. The sperm and the egg have their own microbiome. And that combination creates a certain not only genetic proclivity, but also literally a microbiome, a bacterial phenomenon or landscape. So I just
Right.
wanted to point that out because people often say, oh, well, where did all this come from? And I want to say it came from not only generations, but it
Yeah.
comes from conception. So thank you. It's just another reiteration of that. So yeah, tell us, how did you get into this world of microbiomes and hormones?
I started practicing acupuncture about 30 years ago. Your father, I just have to share this. I know Amy because in my previous life, I was an art director and designer, and I worked for her dad, Mel, and Mel Novatt. I love Mel. I just adore Mel. So yeah, I worked for Mel, and during that time, I made a transition to go to school for acupuncture. And your father was so incredibly supportive. He would set up photo shoots around my school schedule. So your family is very dear to me.
I want to point out to the audience, I have not seen Meg now, I mean,
I was at
decades.
your Thanksgiving dinner about 30 years ago.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
So yes, we are both devotees of Mel Novat. But it is so lovely to see you after so many decades. Yeah.
Thank
So,
you. Thank
all
you.
right. So hormones and the microbiome.
Yeah. So I started practicing in around 96 and 95, 96. And I was doing acupuncture for 5 years in New York. And I was getting a lot of referrals from personal trainers, dance companies. My partner at the time was a dancer. So all her, friends would be coming in and being referred like, hey, can you help these women? They're having difficulty getting pregnant. They're having miscarriages. They're having failed IVFs. I'm like, okay, I'll try. So I started doing acupuncture, making basic nutritional suggestions, herbal suggestions. But I started seeing a pattern. And I started noticing that women that were coming to me with non-related fertility issues were mirroring the same markers. And I'll explain that women that were coming to see me that were struggling with getting pregnant. And what I mean by that, a lot of stress, not enough sleep. They had a diet that was not, was missing a lot of nutrients. There's a lot of processed food. And they were having difficulty in detoxing. So there was a layering of things going on. They were having gut issues, a lot of digestive issues. And I thought, if these women with non-related fertility issues coming in with PMS and stress and headaches, if they didn't start making lifestyle changes, that they'd end up in my office a few years later facing their own challenges of infertility. And that's when I realized about 5 years into practice that I had to immerse myself in a better understanding of nutrition and hormones from a functional, holistic perspective. And so that's why I consider myself to be an integrative practitioner, because I do so much telehealth. I do more of that than I do acupuncture, but I have that Eastern background of Chinese medicine with functional holistic medicine, and I merge the two together.
I'm curious, Meg. I must admit, I lament what I was not taught in medical school and during my residency. In acupuncture training, did they talk about this connection between nutrition and hormones,
Yeah,
or was this
that's
something
part of
they
it.
did? It's
And
great
guess where
because,
root cause that term came from? Chinese medicine.
tell me about that.
Well, when we look at Chinese medicine, or when we look, even in functional medicine, you want to look at why is someone having their symptoms. I get calls so many times from women going, my hormones are out of balance. And I'm like, well, what's going on with your gut? What else is happening? So I
Right.
say, I want to get to the rootiest cause and causes of why someone is sick. And it's a multi-layering of things. And in Chinese medicine, my perspective is a lot different now because of all the clinical experience. But it's still, you want to always look at the nervous system. What I love about acupuncture, it just brings us into that parasympathetic response. This is that rest, digest, recovery. And a lot of times when women are under stress, their digestion is completely compromised. So I say, when you're eating under stress, it's like you're trying to wash your clothes in the dryer. I like that.
I like that.
Or here's another
like
analogy.
That. Yeah.
Another analogy I use in my podcast a lot. If you were to go to Joey the mechanic and your car is clunking, how would you feel if Joey said every time, you need a new transmission? Oh, but Joey, I think it's my tire. No. You need a new transmission. You get a new transmission and nothing changes. And I think, and I don't want to poo-poo, I have a lot of friends that are doctors, but they're taking more of a functional approach. You want to look at, why is someone having issues? What's going on in the gut? I do a lot of stool testing, and stool testing gives me a lot of information about the microbiome, how well someone is digesting their food. I've seen markers where I could tell somebody was on the verge of having their gallbladder removed. There's a lot that I can see. I can see markers for immunity, and I can see, this is important, if women are detoxing estrogen well. There's a marker in the gut called beta-glucuronidase, and when that enzyme is elevated, you know this, that's an indication that there's an imbalance of good and bad bacteria.
So let's back up for a moment, because when people hear stool testing, in the allopath's environment, you might be testing for certain pathogens, maybe looking for blood, but a lot of doctors don't do this kind of expansive test. So I'm going to be kind of really literal here. How does someone submit a stool sample to you, and what happens when what happens? How does it happen?
So I just sent some out this morning and yesterday, and one for a couple that they're trying to have a child. So I use a really good lab. I'm just going to put it. I use Vibrant Wellness. I think they do the best stool testing, and they send people the kit, and they do a little stool sample at home, and they FedEx the kit back, and I get those results within about 4 weeks. And what I love about stool test, it tells me a story about someone's life.
Is it expensive?
Yeah. It's probably a little over $500.
Yeah. Okay.
Just for the test. It's about $500 for the test. But here's the great thing, and I say this to people: you're investing in your wellness. You're going to get the answers. I've had, and I'm sure you too, I've had people, 15, 20 doctors before they end up in my office. And I just do foundational. I listen. I really listen when I have an intake. It's a 90-minute intake. And I look at everybody's forms before they come in, and I look at a food journal. So food journal, what someone's eating tells me a lot, but that stool test can provide the missing pieces. I had somebody a few years ago that, this has happened with a few people. I've had people having real difficulty getting pregnant. I use pregnancy, but this applies to autoimmune, and I can share some examples with autoimmune. I had a woman that had failed IVF, failed IUIs, miscarriages, did a stool test, and she had liver flukes.
Huh.
And her mother had passed from breast cancer, and her beta glucuronidase, it's supposed to be below 2,300. It was like 7,800.
Hmm.
And there were some other markers that I looked at. Wasn't digesting food. So I did antimicrobials. Actually, I had her on a medication to clear the liver flukes.
And are you talking about conventional antimicrobials?
Oh, yeah. One
okay.
was specific that she had to order. And it was a pharmacy up in Massachusetts that had it. So anyway, I had her call. Her friend was a GP, call to get that. And I also use antimicrobials. Sometimes you just got to take up the guns and do it. I mean, I'm like for whatever works and that's going to help someone heal. And
so in other words, what we're talking about, and just to clarify, I think I know that Meg and I would agree that overuse of antibiotics is not good for people. It's not. We know this. There's lots of science to suggest this. At the same time, does this mean that we never use antibiotics? Of course not. It means that you use it sparingly, you use it with very definitive purpose and intention. It's not the situation where, oh, we don't really know what's wrong with you, let's just give you antibiotics. No. That is actually dangerous in my mind.
And that happens a lot.
A lot. So you're talking about giving an a medication directed directly for those organisms.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then how did you respond to the elevation in the enzyme? What did you talk to her about?
Diet. She quit her job.
So your assessment was that stress was part of the reason
it was
she was not dealing
for
with
some people,
estrogen.
and I'm using a person. I'm really talking about a few, so I don't want anyone to listen to this comment. She's pointing me out.
Oh, no. Yeah, exactly.
But this person did have flukes, but liver flukes. But and I had other people with parasites, and I'm doing a podcast. I'm interviewing someone tomorrow. Parasites are very big. But anyway, getting back to this, I changed her diet. I had started her on some different antimicrobials before we got the results. I just cleaned up her gut.
Yeah.
I changed. And I have to say, stress, I look at health as like there's an umbrella over us. And what are we using where are there leaks in the umbrella that the water is dripping on our heads? If we don't address stress, nothing changes. So that stress with women is just through the roof. I always ask people, where is your stress? 1 to 10. And I have some people go, oh, it's a 3. I'm like, if we add 2 zeros to it, then that's where your level of stress. People are so stressed sometimes that it becomes a norm. They've lost that that barometer. They just don't know, So
well, it's interesting, right? Isn't it? Because you're talking about, in a way, measuring stress through a stool sample. And bear with me.
Part of the picture. Yeah.
Exactly. And I guess I want to point out to our listeners that you're right. There's so often I'll have somebody come into my office, and quite frankly, I intuit the minute they walk through the door, or I walk through the door, that stress is filling every corner of the room here. And it's not just because they're concerned about being in a doctor's office, which of course brings a certain amount of stress, but it's really about the stress they kind of carry like a heavy overcoat, even in the face of summertime, right? Yeah. And we so normalize this because, I mean, one, does anyone know anyone who doesn't have some level of stress? Of course, just being in the world. And quite frankly, from my perspective, a little bit of stress is important for the body. The body learns from this, but we're talking about excess stress. We're talking about waking in the middle of the night, thinking about everything, that's happening in our lives, that we can't slow our breath down. We talk about breathing a lot on GynoCurious, where you don't have any moment in your day that's about taking care of you. I mean, so listening to your mind and your body and your family around what is the role of stress in your life? How do you evaluate it? Are you evaluating it? That's part of what we're talking about today.
Well, I've said over the years that stress is an unintentional form of birth control and the largest endocrine disruptor. The
Well put.
body wants to live in a very calm, parasympathetic response. And as you said, breath is, I've said to people, you're having a difficult day. I'll give them breathing exercises to do at their desk. Breathe. We don't
Right.
breathe.
We don't. We pant.
don't.
We pant.
Our breath, I feel the most intimate relationship we will have with anything or anyone is our breath. It is the first thing that we take in, and it is the last thing that we release.
Mm.
It's very intimate.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And
it
we've
is.
lost that connection.
Yeah. That's why I tell people to sing. Because singing, even if it's a happy birthday tune, it reminds us of how we're taking in and expiring the air. And there's so much teaching here. So let's get back to you mentioned it already to some degree, but I want to isolate it so people really hear. So what are the ways that our microbiome that we get through through birth, from conception, how does it become altered? We talked about antibiotics. We talked about stress. Are there some other things that people can think about?
Processed foods.
Yeah, the American diet.
And I am not a fan of gluten. And I do a lot of testing for gluten and extensive testing. And there are some really, really good markers that come up. I mean, zonulin. So the issue, I'm going to simplify it. We all love bread. We all love gluten. I'll tell you a story, my gluten story. And the issue with gluten, we don't have the enzymes. We don't produce the complete enzymes to break down gluten. So every time we eat some bread or some pasta, it causes a little tear in the lining. And then the lining heals within a few days.
Lining of your gut. That's
the lining of the gut. Yeah, thank you for interjecting. So the lining of the gut gets a little tear, causes inflammation, and the body recovers. But I think part of the issue also with gluten is that it's so highly sprayed with glyphosates. So you have this, and I want to tie in
this country in particular.
In this country. But even when people go, I go abroad and I eat gluten, people still have problems with gluten. So gluten doesn't always show up as gas and bloat. It can show up as depression. It can show up as schizophrenia. It can show up as a bipolar disorder. It can show up as ADHD. Because why is that? Because we cannot break down gluten. It causes these little tears in the gut. And then what it does, it causes something that's called a leaky gut. So imagine you have, this is all audio, it's not video.
No, we are videoing.
Oh, yes. Good. Okay. So you have these tight junctions, just like this. This is the mesh of your gut. But when we eat gluten, or if we're having antibiotics, doing courses of them, rounds of them, or even one round, and I'll go into that in a moment, it starts to open up the lining of your gut. And then we start leaking back into the bloodstream undigested food, protein, bacteria, a lot of funky things that should be remaining inside the gut.
Let me point out, I'm going to interject for a moment. Let me just point out there's always some absorption through. There's always some, these tight junctions are not made of cement.
No, they're like gates, like the Panama Canal.
Exactly.
They're these little gates.
Right.
But I use this. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And that 20, that the small intestine is just, that area of our bowels that we absorb our nutrients is one cell thick, which is so profound. So anyway, gluten is very difficult. What I find in my world, when I take people off gluten, they feel better. They're less puffy. They have less gas and bloat. I've found that when I've taken people off gluten, their antibodies, thyroid antibodies, start dropping.
So let me point out, we're not talking about celiac per se.
No, we're not. We're not.
Right.
This is not celiac.
Right.
This is everybody in the world, particularly Americans, because there's so much, we eat so much gluten. Gluten's in everything. It's in our toast, it's in our bread, it's in our crackers, it's hidden
to be in your ketchup.
medication.
I mean, it can be like, yeah.
It's
but
in
let
everything.
me, I wanna ask a question, because
Sure.
I've experienced personally where I've gone off gluten and then gone back on, and I am one of those people who it's true, when I travel, I'll have, if I'm lucky to be in Paris, I'll have a baguette, and I just relish it and love it and feel fine and think, oh, it's because they don't use GMOs and they don't spray their crops. But the trouble with the totally gluten-free diet for some is that they replace it with other products that I'm not convinced are really good for you either.
No, and I don't believe, a big piece for me, it's really funny that I'm being interviewed because I'm usually the interviewer directing the questions. So I feel like I'm going all over the place. So it's good that you're kind of
let's talk
back.
about, because there's so much conversation about gluten-free diets right now. But if you look at a lot of the products, so if I go to my health food store and I look at the gluten-free aisle and I look at the ingredients, first of all, one of the things I always tell people, if you're looking at the value of food, if there's, more ingredients than you can count, or there's so many ingredients you can't even pronounce, like, stay away from them. And a lot of these gluten-free products have a lot of gums and sugar alternatives. And so how do you counsel your patients about alternative ways of getting some of the fiber that they might be getting through their carbohydrate intake? Like, let's talk a little bit about the practical response to gluten-free.
So this is my philosophy. Bags are for garbage, shoes and boxes are for shoes. And I myself am on a gluten-free diet, but I eat a lot of veggies. I make a flaxseed bread that has buckwheat flour in it. I'll change it. I do a lot of my prep because this is very sad. So much of our food is processed. And everybody eats bread. They're always eating sandwiches. But what if we were, and I because I work with a lot of people with incredible inflammation. I say, whatever you make for dinner, make enough and that'll be your lunch. I don't miss bread. I mean, I'll have something occasionally. I mean, I was at my sister's for Thanksgiving, and yes, I had Thanksgiving turkey stuffing. It was so good, but I don't make a regular, habit of doing that. When I do eat, I don't feel well when I eat it.
So you're pointing out two things. One, when we talk about, I don't know, embracing a new way of being in our lives, one doesn't have to be perfect at it. One, it has to be logical and practical and thoughtful about it. So let's say you decide after this conversation with Meg, you're going to try to go gluten-free. What Meg's pointing out is you can have a pleasurable meal episodically that includes gluten, but take notice of how you feel.
A few days later, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. If in fact you realize, oh, yeah, I don't quite feel so good, or, oh, this reminds me of how I used to feel all the time.
Or, gee, my fingers hurt, or I'm feeling a little brain fog.
Yeah, just take note. Yeah. So but I do want to get to the practical. So again, if somebody's in the health food store and they're deciding not to eat gluten, how do they approach those gluten-free products, Meg? Are there certain guidelines you can give them around?
I don't like a lot of processed stuff. I'm going to be brutally honest with you. I mean, if you look in Chinese medicine, they don't eat bread. They eat grain. I mean, they eat rice. I mean, there are a lot of cultures don't. We're addicted to bread. I use cassava tortillas. And I make sure that I'm putting healthy fat on that and good protein. If you want to have a rice cake, make sure that you have some good protein or healthy fat like nut butter on that. Because, I don't know, I'm going off here. A lot of times people are like, oh, I'm going to crunch on rice crackers. It's just a carb.
Right.
But I am of this, I guess, I know for me that, part of my journey is that I had a terrible eating disorder. I was anorexic and bulimic in my teens and my 20s.
Hmm.
And I had a really, really good functional medicine doc, Dr. Bezosa, back in the 80s. And even back then, I had issues with gluten. I changed my relationship with food. And I want to tie that in. What is our relationship with food? Food is medicine. Your kitchen is your apothecary. How do you make it your friend? I say to a lot of people say to me, I don't like the kitchen. I'm like, well, change the relationship. You like food, so change it. So I had to establish a new relationship with food, that it just wasn't about binging and purging. And it was about finding foods that made me feel good, that made me feel grounded, that made me feel, and I did a lot of good therapy, and that made me feel good inside my body and comfortable. I started to learn how to be a good mother to myself. And that is really what I try to emulate and try to share with women. This is an opportunity right now. If you're going through a health crisis, how can you pause, take a step back, and say, what do I need for me? How do I be that mother to myself? Maybe for the first time in your life, you're giving yourself what you never got growing up. You're giving yourself that self-love. And you know what? Not time to blame. It's about, I have a choice to give myself something new and different that's going to allow me to heal body, mind, and spirit. Because anytime I'm dealing with gut issues, I'm always thinking about, how am I nurturing this person's heart? All healing, Chinese medicine, all healing takes place through the heart.
Yeah. And since what I think is pretty true for most vulva havers is that they're not just taking care of themselves, but they're taking care of their parents or their siblings or their friends or their
Absolutely.
children or their home or their community.
It becomes a
So
ripple effect.
exactly. So the heart, the extension of the heart and eating well creates a community of folks who are healthier. And so our proclivity is to nurture. We can nurture in this way. And, I'm the first one to report. I used to joke with my kids when I was working, lots and lots and lots of hours.
I'm sure.
I'd say on my headstone, it will say she hated preparing dinner Monday through Thursday because I couldn't stand it. I'd come home after a long day and all I wanted to do was be with my kids. I didn't want to have to make dinner. And I admit I didn't always prepare the healthiest of things, even though I knew better. It was exhausting to think about it. Now that my kids are out of the house and, quite frankly, they have individually become, great chefs. They have become so clear about what feeds them nutritionally and makes them feel good and what doesn't make them feel good. And they're both gluten-free, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting response, I think, to the crazy life that I was living at one time and how I approached supporting them nutritionally. Now, we had great things in the house, but it was just I'm speaking to the emotional component.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, you felt that you were in charge of cooking all the meals. Did your husband or someone else help
Yes,
out?
my husband was very helpful.
Good.
Very helpful. But he also lived this incredibly stressful, busy, full life. And, I share this story because so many folks out there have that lifestyle, even with, with two working parents and families today. There's a lot of work to be done.
Can I make some recommendations if this will help people? I mean, these are the people that they're like, I don't have time.
Yeah.
I said, take a night, do it on the weekend, over breakfast, coffee, plan out, what do you want to eat this week?
Yeah.
Some people may not be able to afford it, but it's a thought. I order my meat from Butcher Box. Butcher Box has grass-fed and pastured meat. You don't have to do that. You can get stuff at Costco. Keep it in the freezer. Take it out in the morning. But when you prepare, maybe part of this, because I'm one of 10 kids.
Where are you in that lineup? I have to know.
Number 5.
Aha. Okay.
So When you make a chicken, make 2. When you're making a meatloaf or you're preparing anything, double it. Have a couple of crock pots, maybe on Sunday, later afternoon. Make a big crock pot of stew. Have another one of my mom used to do some of this. Have a few things going. Free stuff.
Yeah.
And also sometimes what's really easy, because sometimes I get busy too, not to the degree maybe sometimes I do. It gets crazy for me. But you can make turkey burgers. Like the other day, I made a bunch of turkey burgers. I put a bunch of herbs in there with shallots and a bunch of stuff, and I let it sit, and then I made, burgers later. Keep some grass-fed beef. Make a burger. Like I'm going to have a grass-fed burger for lunch with veggies and hummus. I cook.
Right.
And I know that I can make that lunch in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I realize, and I've learned over the years, that I know I feel good when I'm eating good food.
Yeah.
And takeout today is so high. I hope I'm not cutting you off.
No, go ahead.
But so much takeout, I really want to let people know, is just saturated in seed oils. And seed oils are high in omega-6s, and they're highly inflammatory. So you want to be looking at olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, ghee. It only takes, maybe a few nights a week you don't cook. You take things out of the freezer. Maybe you have a day a month or 2 days a month. You're just freezing stuff. Get a big freezer, put it in the freezer.
Right. So a lot of these strategies don't require a lot of money. They just require thought and preparation. And again, when we're living busy lives, it feels like I don't even have time to prepare. But it's remarkable what we prioritize in our busy lives. And what we're talking about today is creating a different priority list of realizing that what you eat impacts everything in your body. So I want to move back to the microbiome, and let's talk about what dysbiosis means.
And can I tie something else in, because I think it's really important?
Of course.
I do also, because this ties into the microbiome, I do a tox screen. It's a urine test. I check for heavy metals, I check for chemicals, and I check for mycotoxins that come from mold. If somebody's and sometimes people do not even realize that they're suffering from mycotoxin toxicity. And those labs come back. If you don't address those things, your gut's not going to heal fully, particularly with mold.
Will you explain that, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, mold, well, a lot of times people don't realize, and I'll break it down. If you're seeing a lot of mildew in the bathroom, it could be coming from your HVAC system or a leaky gut, or a leaky roof. Create a leaky gut. And I've had people, I'm listening to their symptoms. I'm like, this is from mold. And I actually, and how did I become more savvy in this? One of the reasons I left Charleston, I was so exposed to black mold.
And what are the symptoms they might think about?
Oh my God, brain fog, joint pain, diarrhea, gas bloat.
Okie dokie, there you go.
Yeah, I had the weirdest symptoms. I was like, I never had this in New York. So I took a deeper dive. And when my labs came back, I was like, holy crud. It was a lot of black mold exposure, because Charleston's kind of old and the homes go back to the 1870s and the walls are not insulated. And so, and I love Charleston. I think it's charming, but it's low country. It's a sponge. So you don't even have to be in a southern damp environment. A lot of times people don't realize their homes are leaky. People are getting respiratory stuff. They're getting weird brain fog. And mycotoxins compromise the gut. And there are markers in stool tests. Sometimes it could be an indication like this person, there might be some mold or some parasitic. I do testing. I just don't go by stool. But I do urine testing, and it is shocking how much mold we're seeing. from
Now,
food.
Meg, if somebody wants to have this kind of urine test done, I know that, again, this is not what we routinely do in an allopathic
No, I wish they did. They
setting.
don't.
Yeah. So where would someone, they can contact you, of course, and we'll
Yeah.
have this in the notes for the
Yeah,
episode.
you want to go through you can't do it. You have to go through a practitioner.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And I would say to many people, there sometimes people offer these stool tests and different things, but you want to be working with a practitioner that really understands the markers and the results and what they're seeing. And I with many people, I say to them, I have to do a tox screen, which consists of heavy metals, chemicals, and like we're exposed to plastics. Everything is plastic in it. We're exposed to pesticides, but mycotoxins is very, very real. And I've had people deathly ill, and I had them have their homes checked. I knew they had mold, and all along the windows were just inundated with mold.
Yeah. Which can be remediated. It's challenging.
Yes, and you can remediate. Yeah. And this is another podcast, just to let you know, if somebody has very heavy mold in their homes, remediation may also be removing furniture.
Yes.
And clothes. That's another story. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Because they're spores.
Yeah.
And they get into not just your lungs and your sinuses, but they get into your clothing, they get into fabric, and they can be everything.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when people are having really wonky symptoms, I have their homes checked, and and I do the testing too.
Yeah. Okay. So we're right. We have so much to talk about. Let's just go a little bit deeper into. Let's talk about dysbiosis. If you would explain to folks what that is, and dysbiosis, how it's related to inflammation.
Okay. Well, dysbiosis, and also lovely listeners, if you go to my website, I have a description on what dysbiosis is and leaky gut, so you can read a little more about it and even listen to some podcasts, because I think this is important. Dysbiosis is an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. It's more bad bacteria than good bacteria. And what causes this? Stress, not getting enough sleep. I want to go through antibiotics. This is some studies that just came out recently, and this is for babies. Children that have just one antibiotic, not even around, will disrupt the microbiome for 6 months to a year.
Yep.
So when adults, so you may have had antibiotics over the past few years, but your gut, you never really did anything to re-inoculate with good bacteria, doing a good probiotic, doing fermented foods. Maybe you had a lot of stress. Maybe you have constipation issues. So diet, bowel movement. I talk about bowels. I want people to have between 2 and 3 bowel movements a day, because I want to be able to move things out of the body. If you're having constipation, you're setting yourself up for an overgrowth of bacteria.
Yeah. Are all probiotics created equal?
No.
Let's just give people some practical information.
Yeah. And I talk about this. I would say it being very comfortable. So let's say you've been on an antibiotic. I would follow up with a probiotic that is Saccharomyces boulardii. And I would do that for like a month. Now, sometimes I will have people on Saccharomyces boulardii if I know that they have a lot of yeast overgrowth. And I'll combine that with another probiotic that is rich in lactobacillus and bifidum bacteria. Those are the things you want to look at. I get a little more specific when I get the stool test back, because I can see where somebody may, a lot of people are like taking Akkermansia. How do you know you need it?
But these are different organisms, people.
I was just going to say, these are different types of organisms. But to be super safe, you get a really good probiotic that has lactobacillus, bifidobacterium. You'll have different strains. That's a good probiotic. It's a great start.
People often ask me, do they need to be in the refrigerator or not? How do you answer that question?
Guess what? Some don't and some do.
Right. And I want to also just put a plug in for naturally fermented foods. So what we're talking about are pickles, kimchi, sauerkraut, but without They should not have any sorbates, nitrates, or even vinegar in them. This is the way your great-grandmother made sauerkraut. Water, cabbage, and salt, and let it ferment, because that fermentation process is the way by which that sauerkraut product has all kinds of bacterium that are so good for you. I take a sip of pickle juice or a forkful of sauerkraut every single day.
Good
And
for you.
I love it. I love the taste of it. It's salty and it's crunchy and it's, not high in calories. So it's all good, but I know that it helps me, particularly if I have a cold. I will, dose up on more of it over the course of those cold symptoms. Okay, we have to talk about hormones now because we will be coming to a close soon. So let's talk about it. Yeah.
All right. What you eat, what you assimilate, and what you eliminate is who you are. So you want to make sure that you have a diet that is nutrient dense in a lot of vegetables, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. I'm going to include sauerkraut. Bok choy, high in indole-3 carbinol, converts to DIM. DIM helps in I'm going to simplify this, in detoxification of estrogen and hormones. And I say it's one of the most important things for women. Eating leafy greens, making sure that, and you're following the rainbow. You're eating vegetables and starchy veggies that are purple and green and yellow. Take a step back in the produce section and go, wow, Meg said maybe I should get green and purple and orange. I'm going to aim for that, and some brown. That's like garlic and onions. Because all that diversity, I'm going to simplify, helps to feed the microbiome. And what does that do? And I want to tie this in because this is very helpful. People are like, why do I have to eat all these different kind of foods? Because your bowels, it's a living organ, and the mucosal lining, you want to have a vibrant, lush, healthy mucosal lining so that whatever's in the bowels stays in the bowels, and whatever needs to go out into the bloodstream is in a very clean state, is not being infected, being impacted by inflammation in the gut. When you eat foods like apples and different veggies and stuff, you're helping to produce or break short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids help you to have a nice mucosal lining, reduce inflammation, keep your gut from being leaky, and create an environment for a healthy microbiome. So you don't want a leaky gut. You want to have good bacteria because you need those things to have healthy hormones. What allows you to have healthy hormones? Sleep, buffered stress, making sure you're digesting your food. And because when we are under stress, the nutrients that we need for healthy, our sex hormones or reproductive hormones, those nutrients are being shunted down stress pathways away from our hormones. So we want to make sure we're supporting that. Another thing that's very important with hormones, and I talk about this a lot in my podcast, a lot of times we talk about detoxification. I talk about drainage before detoxification. If you have a pool and the pool is very murky, you can either keep pouring water in the pool and diluting it, or you can try to figure out, how do I clean out the filters? How do I pull the muck out? So the filters in your pool, liver duct, bile duct, your intestines, your bowels, your kidneys, your liver, your lymphatic system. I have to make sure those filters are open in the pool. How do I do that? We are made of 30 trillion cells, and all those cells make up our organs, our hormones, who we are. I want to make sure that every single cell is working optimally. So I'm going to tie this in because I think it's a very important point, is I use sometimes minerals called fulvic and humic acid and fulvic acid. And I talk a lot about this in my podcast. Please listen because you'll get to learn some new things. Fulvic acid and humic come from the soil, rich soil. And what it does, fulvic, when it gets into your cells, it ushers in nutrients, pulls out toxins, and gives an electrical charge to the energy site that are called the mitochondria. Those are the batteries. You want to you want to have good energy. When you're not feeling well, when you've had antibiotics, when you've had the flu, when you've been exposed to mycotoxins and chemicals, the mitochondria in your cells become compromised. So I always look at, how do I optimize your cells? Now, I use fulvic and humic. They're a beautiful little couple. Humic acid works in the bowels like Velcro to pull toxins out. Mother Nature has provided us with so much stuff, but our soil is so depleted. So every single person I work with is placed on humic and fulvic acid.
So these are supplements that people can get.
These are supplements. And I actually, in my last podcast, I talk about it and where people can get it. But I have to say, vitamin D, humic and fulvic, good probiotic, a really good multivitamin, and fish oils, you're ready to rock. I love magnesium too.
I have said many, many times, so this is going to sound like a disagreement, but I think it's just a matter of finding kind of a balance. I find that so many people will come in and say, oh, I'm taking a multivitamin for women and, I'm all set. And I'm like, well, let's just say the best way to get your nutrients always is through your food. So let's talk about your diet. So I want to make sure that listeners realize that you can't compromise on what you eat and then take a multivitamin and say, oh, I'm all set. One, first of all, we defecate out half of what we take in these multivitamins. So a much more efficient way of getting nutrients is through your foods, please.
That's why it's called a supplement.
Exactly. And I think there are people out there who are going to say, and even I am just, wrapping my head around, wait a second, how does what I eat affect the hormonal state of my body? And part of what you're describing is when we're under stress, for example, not getting enough sleep, for example, this affects our adrenal hormones. This affects our ovarian function. This affects
cortisol,
kind of our endocrine system.
Right.
That makes sense to me. But can we?
Well, okay.
So talked about how the mitochondria are affected by the microbiome, and the mitochondria, yes, is the powerhouse for every function in our body. So that's another way our endocrine system is affected. I just want to make sure we leave listeners kind of understanding the connection.
Amino acids.
What about them? What about them?
This is why animal protein is important, and cold water fish. And a lot of people, women are adverse to, eating meat and are on a plant-based diet. Those branch chain amino acids are complete in protein from animals. And I've worked with so many women that are vegetarian. And if we have a diet that is nutrient dense in protein, women should be getting, and I customize it, between 30 and 40 grams of protein with every single meal.
Whoa, that's a big amount.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, it's palm of the hand.
Yeah.
We don't eat enough protein. Protein is essential. We need we need those amino acids from protein to create neurotransmitters, hormones. We need healthy fats too.
The challenge, of course, is meat is so encumbered by the industry of meat packing, et cetera, surrounded by plastics.
But I'm not talking about conventional meat.
There you go.
I'm talking about pasture. I always have to remember, because pastured, grass-fed, grass-finished. You want to get it from local farmers. You want to support our farmers.
Yeah.
I mean, really, support farmer, Joey. He's also a mechanic, but he's a great farmer. But support local. This is important. Spend the money on the meat. People are like, oh, this costs more. Well, think how much you're spending in takeout. You're not getting quality meat. You're getting a lot of meat that is the cows and the cattle and the chickens and the little piggies. They're being fed grains that are genetically modified, that have been sprayed with pesticides. They've been given antibiotics.
Right. I like to point out the amount of money people spend at Starbucks.
Oh my God. How
much It's
It's
tons of
crazy.
money. And it's not that I don't like coffee. I like coffee, but
I love
if you
coffee.
can make it at home,
That's what I do. And I take it
Exactly.
out with me. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
exactly.
So if I had a client and she was going out all the time and she's like, I'm on a budget. I don't know if I can get these supplements. I'm like, you're going out all the time. A little too many cocktails. Think of how much money you're spending that you could be preparing meals at home or just investing it differently. You're investing it in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
about shifting things.
I will say this, and I'm sure you may agree with me, but 99.9% of the women that I've worked with that have been vegetarian that have come to me with hormonal issues. Once they started incorporating meat, maybe it was just starting with chicken, and then introducing salmon. Once they started bringing meat into their world, then their hormones started to balance. You want hormonal balance? Eat really good protein, eat really yummy veggies to the best of your ability. When you buy organic, if you're like, I can't afford all organic, make sure your greens, your leafy greens are organic. Eat apples are great. Here's a really cool thing about apples. If you can make an applesauce, you chop up apples in a little water, a little cinnamon, keep the skin on them, buy organic, cook them. They are great for constipation and diarrhea because they help to feed short-chain fatty acids.
Yeah, if you don't have to get rid of the peels on your foods,
No,
please
don't.
keep them. They have
That's the
so much
fiber.
nutrition. That's right.
That's the
Gosh,
fiber.
there's so much to talk about.
And I'll leave with this. And if people do green juices, do it in the blender with a little water. Do not, and because then just I use my Vitamix. Not now, it's too cold outside, but you'll get all the fiber with the vegetables,
right.
the juice.
Yeah, great.
Was there anything else? I'm sorry, I'm like,
No. Again, it's such a vast topic,
it's
and I
huge.
just want to.
That's why I'm
I
writing a
want to.
book on it.
Yeah. Oh, I so look forward to it. The I guess if I had to summarize our talk
Yeah.
today, everyone out there, and I want to remind you that Meg and I. I'm going to speak for Meg because I'm making an assumption. So correct me if I'm wrong. Listen, every day I think about what I'm going to eat. Every day I
Yeah.
think about how I'm going to take better care of myself. I don't pretend to know how to do this perfectly. And boy, do Thanksgiving, I had a piece of chocolate cake that was
Oh, it was
just
great.
totally delicious. But quite frankly, I won't have another piece of cake for a long time. So I got so much pleasure out of it. I relished the holiday and the celebration of it. So we're not talking about avoiding foods that you love, always. It's about being practical, financially responsible, thoughtful about supporting local farms, thinking about if I'm going to make one change, how do I make sure that let's just say you love hamburgers, let's just focus on where you get your chopped meat. And
Yeah.
and everything else can stay still for a moment, but let's focus on one thing at a time. We're not asking you to change your whole life all at once because that is just too much for most of us. So
That's what I
small,
do.
yeah, small
Honestly.
changes
Yeah.
can make huge shifts in the internal system, your microbiome, your hormonal milieu, how you feel. Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about, folks, is how do you feel in the day in and day out in our busy lives, and ways of just bringing a sense of health and well-being more consistently to the moments of each day. Yeah.
Dietary change, they're just like habits. It's like when you walk into a room, you turn on the light, you don't think about it. And I will interject this. A lot of people that come to see me, I actually ask them to lean in and make these changes. And guess what? They do.
Oh, it's not impossible.
You
It's
can,
just,
because you know why? They start feeling different.
that's
If
right.
you're experiencing, I've had people, and I'm sharing this with you because I know some of your listeners, you've had pain for 10 years, 20 years, and suddenly you make these changes and you're like, wait a minute, it's only been 2 weeks. I feel so different
Yeah.
because you're designed to thrive and food can provide that.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. So I like to end GynoCurious by asking my guests to talk about pleasure. And if you would please share with us, what is one thing aside from eating well and preparing your
Mm.
foods and things we've already mentioned, what is one thing you do in your life that gives you pleasure?
I moved to Atlanta 3 years ago and I was living downtown. It was a little too busy for me. And I moved to Decatur. And there's a beautiful park called Mason Mill Park. And I make it a point almost every day to go for a long walk. And I'm in
Mm.
nature. And that's the world to me. And I actually met someone who was doing foraging for mushrooms. And I'm going to be meeting with him and exploring that. But I love being in nature. It just grounds me.
It is remarkable how many folks, how many guests talk about the impact of nature on their well-being
Oh my
and the
God.
pleasure that they get from it.
Yeah.
So, it's a reminder, even if you live in an urban setting, get outdoors, feel the air, go and hug a tree. Just do something that allows you to breathe in the natural world. It's so important.
And one more thing, if I can just share. When I'm walking, it's my time to give gratitude
Mm,
because I say to people, think about 3 things that you can give gratitude for. Drop into your heart
mm,
because that changes the vibration of your body.
mm. Harks
So,
back to what you learned in Chinese medicine. If the
yeah,
heart is in fact the source of all healing,
yeah,
attitude is such a salve for that.
yeah. And
Yeah,
breathe in, breathe.
yeah, breathe in. Yep. Thank you, Meg. I can't,
Thank
it's
you.
been such a pleasure to speak with you. And
Oh.
I suspect we're going to have to find another time to speak again because there's
Um,
just so much to unwrap.
did you want me to share with people if they want to reach out to me? Are you going to put that in the show notes?
We'll put that in the show notes, but if you want to say it out loud too, that's
Yeah,
great.
you can reach me at megrichichi.com. I'm sure you'll put a little tag
Yep.
up or something. And all my contact information is there. You can actually see the podcast, click on that. And if you want to set up a discovery call and talk further, I provide a lot of information that we've discussed in the show. I may be able to explain it in a way that you can be able to take it in further and use it, apply it to your lives. But I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here today. Thank you.
It's so great to see you and speak to you and to honor my father. So
Now
thank you.
he's listening.
He's listening. There you go. I want to also thank my co-producers, Jen Hammoud and Maddie Rosenberg. And until the next episode of GynoCurious, please stay well. Listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the greatest of teachers, not to be ignored.